The dense air of the workshop vibrated with the metallic echo of hammers striking incandescent steel. In that humble space in Detroit, among tools rusted by years of constant use and metal pieces scattered across the packed earth floor, a 36-year-old man worked obsessively under the dim, yellowish light of a kerosene lamp that cast dancing shadows on the weathered wooden walls. His hands, stained with black grease up to his wrists and marked by small scars from years of manual work, firmly held a wrench, while his blue eyes shone with a supernatural intensity that dramatically contrasted with the extreme modesty of his work environment. The penetrating smell of burnt oil mixed intensely with the acrid aroma of hot metal and coal smoke, creating a complex symphony of industrial aromas that permeated every corner of the small shed that served as a laboratory for impossible dreams. Henry Ford, dressed in overalls worn by daily use and a wrinkled cotton shirt that had seen better days, did not at all resemble the man who was about to completely revolutionize the entire world and forever change the way humanity transports itself, works, and lives. But in his mind burned a vision so powerful, so transformative, and so audacious that it would keep any ordinary mortal awake for months, to put all of America on wheels, democratize transportation, and free millions of working families from the geographical limitations that had defined their lives for entire generations. It wasn't simply about building elegant and expensive automobiles for the wealthy magnates of Wall Street or the aristocrats of the East Coast, but about creating a machine so efficient, reliable, and economically accessible that even the humblest worker in Detroit could afford it with his weekly salary. How did a man without formal education, born on a lost farm in Michigan among cornfields and ramshackle barns, managed to build an industrial empire that forever transformed the way all of humanity transports itself, works, lives, and dreams of the future? This question tormented for more than 2 consecutive decades one of the most brilliant and meticulous researchers of the human mind, Napoleon Hill, the man who dedicated his entire life to deciphering the secret codes of human success. Hill dedicated more than 20 obsessive years of his existence to meticulously studying the most successful and powerful men of his era, from steel magnate Andrew Carnegie to genius inventor Thomas Edison, including bankers, industrialists, politicians, and entrepreneurs, who had built colossal fortunes from absolute nothing. But it was precisely in Henry Ford where Hill discovered a secret so simple, so powerful, and so universally applicable that any person on this planet, regardless of their humble origin, their lack of formal education, or their initial economic limitations, could apply it methodically to completely transform their destiny and create the life of abundance they had always dreamed of. The revolutionary secret that you are about to discover in the next few minutes will not remain hidden forever in the dusty archives of history. I solemnly promise you that by the end of this transformative narrative, you will have in your hands the same master key that Ford used to open the armored doors of prosperity. And you will know exactly, step by step, how to apply it in your personal life from this very moment. Exciting introduction. The United States at the turbulent dawn of the 20th century was a nation of brutal social contrasts and economic inequalities that challenged every notion of justice. While the opulent mansions of Fifth Avenue in New York gleamed every night with crystal chandeliers imported from Europe and extravagant parties that cost more money than an average worker would see in their entire lifetime, millions of European immigrants crammed into infected tenements desperately struggled to survive another day with miserable wages that barely reached to buy hard bread and dirty water. The Industrial Revolution had created an incredibly powerful financial elite composed of a few families who controlled railroads, banks, mines, and factories, but it had also dramatically widened the chasm between rich and poor as never before had occurred in American history, creating social tensions that threatened to explode at any moment. In this historical context of extreme social inequality and vertiginous technological transformation, 2 absolutely extraordinary figures were destined by fate to meet and forever change our fundamental understanding of what separates winners from losers, empire builders from eternal dreamers. On one side, Henry Ford, the stubborn visionary born on a farm who fervently believed with every fiber of his being that economic prosperity and opportunities for progress should be within reach of all honest workers in America, not just a privileged elite who had inherited their wealth. On the other side, Napoleon Hill, the ambitious young journalist from West Virginia, who had received directly from Andrew Carnegie, the richest man in America, the seemingly impossible mission of dedicating the next 20 years of his life to scientifically decipher the exact formula of human success by interviewing the 500 most successful men on the continent. Hill was not simply another writer of self-help books filled with empty platitudes and superficial advice. He was a meticulous and scientific researcher of the millionaire mind. An authentic social scientist who for more than 2 complete decades personally interviewed, obsessively studied, and minutely analyzed the mental patterns of 500 men of fortune to unravel the universal and immutable principles that had taken them from poverty to the absolute summit of material success. His monumental work was not based on abstract theories created in academic ivory towers, but on real, verifiable, and repeatable patterns directly observed in the most brilliant, most disciplined, and most successful minds of an entire historical generation. When Hill meticulously studied Henry Ford for entire months, he did not find a technical genius with superhuman intellectual coefficient, nor a privileged heir who had received family fortunes on a silver platter. He found something much more hopeful, an absolutely common man in terms of natural intelligence who had applied extraordinary mental principles with fanatic discipline. Ford had abandoned formal school at 16 to work on farms. He had failed spectacularly in multiple previous business attempts, losing his life savings in each failure. He had been publicly ridiculed by recognized industry experts who considered his revolutionary ideas as dangerous and unrealizable fantasies of an ignorant peasant. However, something fundamental in Ford's mental structure was completely different from the average mentality. Something that Napoleon Hill would meticulously identify as the common denominator among all the great winners of all human history, from the pharaohs of Egypt to the industrial magnates of America. If you want to discover exactly how the great minds of history achieved extraordinary success, and how you can apply these revolutionary, proven, and verified principles in your own personal and professional life to create similar results, subscribe right now to the channel and join us until the end of this transformative journey that could change your destiny forever. Chapter 1. The Power of Definite Purpose. In the cobblestone streets of the industrial heart of Detroit, while the giant chimneys of hundreds of factories painted the morning sky charcoal gray and thick smoke mixed with the natural dawn mist, Henry Ford walked slowly through the bustling avenues, meticulously observing something that most people could not perceive with their physical eyes. Where the hurried crowd perceived only the typical and predictable urban chaos of an industrial city in full growth, Ford visualized with cinematic clarity something absolutely revolutionary. Entire working families mobilizing freely throughout the continent, workers arriving punctually at their jobs without depending on restrictive schedules of overcrowded streetcars, young adventurers exploring educational and commercial opportunities far beyond the narrow geographical limits of their native neighborhoods. This transformative vision was not a vague romantic fantasy or an idealistic dream without practical foundations. Ford had intuitively developed what Napoleon Hill would identify years later as the first and most fundamental of all principles of human success, a purpose defined with mathematical precision. But Hill's revolutionary definition of this transcendental concept went infinitely beyond simply having a goal or wanting something intensely. A truly defined purpose, according to Hill's exhaustive research, must meet specific and non-negotiable criteria that completely distinguish it from the vague desires and passive hopes that characterize the average mentality. First, the purpose must be crystal clear in its clarity, so specific that you can describe it exactly in concrete and measurable terms. Ford did not vaguely say, "I want to help working people," or "I desire to be successful in the automotive business." His purpose was as precise as a mathematical equation, impossible to misinterpret: to manufacture automobiles so economical, reliable, and efficient that every American family, even those with the most modest resources, could own one and thus transform their quality of life forever. Second, the genuine purpose must be inexorably backed by a specific deadline and a detailed action plan with concrete and measurable steps. Ford established specific deadlines and designed detailed strategies to reach each phase of his monumental objective. It was not about a passive desire that hoped to materialize magically, but about an active and disciplined obsession that consciously guided every decision of his daily life. Third, the purpose must be accompanied by an unshakable determination to pay any legitimate price necessary to materialize it. Ford was willing to work 16 hours daily, invest all his savings, risk his social reputation, and face the ruthless criticism of recognized experts. Think of it this revealing way: a car without fuel is simply a useless set of metal pieces absolutely incapable of moving even a single centimeter. The defined purpose is the high-octane psychological fuel that puts in unstoppable motion all the complex machinery of human success. Without it, natural talent, university education, social connections, and financial resources remain completely inert, like a turned-off engine in a dark garage. Ford had intuitively discovered something that Hill would scientifically document for decades. Successful people are not necessarily the most intelligent, according to academic tests, the most educated according to university diplomas, or the most privileged according to inherited bank accounts. They are those who have developed the mental capacity to concentrate all their psychological energy on a specific objective until converting it into tangible reality. During his first difficult years of constant experimentation, Ford worked obsessively in his improvised workshop until the early hours of dawn, not because he was a compulsive work addict, but because his defined purpose had completely transformed exhausting effort into energizing passion. Every nut he meticulously adjusted, every design he patiently modified, every failure he persistently corrected, brought him one calculated step closer to his inevitable final goal. Ford's employees and acquaintances noticed something absolutely peculiar and inspiring in their boss's mentality. While other businessmen constantly complained about economic difficulties and bureaucratic obstacles, Ford seemed to be supernaturally energized by every complex problem he faced. Challenges did not discourage or distract him. They inspired him to find more creative and innovative solutions. This fundamental difference in mentality is exactly what Hill identified as the unmistakable distinctive mark of all the great winners of history. For the average person, obstacles are red stop signs that clearly indicate, maybe I should look for an easier and less risky path. For someone with a genuinely defined purpose, obstacles are simply interesting mental puzzles that must be methodically resolved on the way to the destination they consider absolutely inevitable. The defined purpose became Ford's universal master key to overcome every obstacle that fate strategically placed in his path. Because when you know exactly where you are going and why you are going there, every challenge automatically transforms into a golden opportunity to demonstrate how seriously you speak about materializing your vision. Chapter 2. Practical Imagination. In a historical epoch, when the vast majority of the American population considered automobiles as expensive and impractical mechanical toys designed exclusively for eccentric millionaires and European aristocrats, Henry Ford observed the same reality, but saw something completely different and revolutionary. But here lies a common and fundamental misunderstanding about Ford's true genius that Napoleon Hill meticulously clarified in his research. Ford was not the original inventor of the automobile. Carl Benz had officially patented the first motorized vehicle in 1886. Gottlieb Daimler had brilliantly developed the first high-speed gasoline engine. The Charles and Frank Duryea brothers were already commercially manufacturing automobiles in Massachusetts. So if Ford did not invent the automobile, what exactly did he do that all the other inventors and engineers had not done? Hill identified in Ford what he scientifically called practical imagination, an absolutely revolutionary concept that dramatically differentiates eternal dreamers from real builders of lasting empires. Practical imagination, Hill explained, is not about creating something completely new from absolute nothing, but about taking already existing elements and combining them in innovative ways that produce useful, accessible, and transformative results for all humanity. While other automobile manufacturers obsessively focused on creating luxurious and personalized vehicles for millionaire clients with extravagant tastes, Ford applied his practical imagination to a completely different problem: how to make a technically complex product simple, absolutely reliable, and economically accessible to the working masses of America. The revealing answer came when Ford meticulously observed the giant slaughterhouses of Chicago during an industrial research visit. There, cattle moved efficiently in a processing line, where each specialized worker performed a specific and repetitive task with chronometered precision. Ford genially imagined the completely inverse process. Instead of dismantling organic products, assembling mechanical products. Instead of processing meat, building automobiles. But Ford's revolutionary practical imagination did not stop solely at the assembly line. He visualized a complete and integrated industrial ecosystem, specialized factories that would internally produce their own components, private railroads that would efficiently transport raw materials, trained dealerships that would professionally sell the vehicles, and certified workshops that would competently repair them. Ford was not just manufacturing automobiles, he was creating an entire industry from scratch. Hill observed that people genuinely gifted with practical imagination possess a specific and trainable mental quality. They can see the hidden potential in apparently ordinary situations. Where others see unsolvable problems, they see lucrative opportunities. Where others see permanent limitations, they see infinite possibilities for creative innovation. For example, when Ford's unionized workers legitimately complained that exhausting 12-hour workdays fatigued them physically and significantly reduced their productivity, most industrial businessmen would have automatically responded, "That's how things are established in our industry, and there's nothing we can do to change them." Ford applied practical imagination to this challenge. What would happen if I reduce working hours from 12 to 8, but increase wages from $2.50 to $5 per day? The result was absolutely revolutionary and established a historical precedent. Better paid and less fatigued workers were significantly more productive, had lower job turnover, generated fewer quality errors, and, here comes the strategic genius, could economically afford to buy the same automobiles they manufactured daily. Ford had brilliantly transformed his employees into potential customers, creating a self-sustaining virtuous circle that simultaneously benefited the company, the workers, their families, and entire society. This is precisely the crucial difference between passively dreaming and actively implementing that Hill obsessively documented in all his studies. Dreamers build beautiful castles in the air. Possessors of practical imagination build solid ladders to reach them. Practical imagination also manifested when Ford faced the shortage of high-quality steel. Instead of complaining or raising prices, he established his own iron mines, specialized foundries, and steel plants. When transportation costs threatened his margins, he built his own fleet of ships and railroad lines. Practical imagination became the mental bridge that Ford used to transform his abstract visions into concrete realities that measurably improved the lives of millions of people, because he knew that ideas without action are simply intellectual entertainment, while systematically implemented ideas become immortal legacies that transcend generations. Chapter 3. The Force of the Mastermind. In the elegantly decorated private study of Thomas Edison in Menlo Park, New Jersey, two undisputed titans of American industry held a historical conversation that would literally change the course of Western civilization. Edison, known worldwide as the Wizard of Menlo Park, with more than 1,000 revolutionary patents registered in his name, attentively listened to the passionate words of a determined young businessman from Detroit who detailed his audacious plans to completely revolutionize human transportation. Henry Ford had deliberately and strategically sought the personal friendship and professional advice of Edison, not by fortunate chance or blind luck, but through the conscious application of a principle that Napoleon Hill would subsequently identify as one of the most powerful and influential in all his two-decade research: the supernatural power of the mastermind. Hill scientifically defined the mastermind as the harmonious coordination of specialized knowledge and concentrated effort in a spirit of absolute cooperation between two or more people for the achievement of a specific and defined purpose. But this technical definition fails to capture the true transformative magic of this fundamental principle. The genuine mastermind, according to Hill, creates something that completely transcends the arithmetic sum of its individual parts. It is a phenomenon that generates a form of collective intelligence that no individual participant could reach working in isolation, regardless of how naturally brilliant they might be. Imagine two mechanical gears perfectly synchronized in a precision machine. Individually, each one can generate a certain specific amount of rotational force, but when they work together, in perfect chronometered harmony, the resulting force is exponentially greater than the mathematical sum of their individual capacities. This is exactly how a genuine mastermind alliance works between complementary human minds. Ford intuitively understood that his monumental vision was too big, too complex, and too ambitious for a single mind, regardless of how brilliant, disciplined, or determined it might be. He urgently needed to surround himself with specialized people whose unique abilities would complement and exponentially amplify his own. But Ford was not simply looking for talented employees or occasional consultants who worked for salaries. He was looking for passionate co-conspirators in his historical mission to transform the world, people who genuinely shared his vision and were willing to invest their own professional reputations in the success of the common project. His personal relationship with Edison perfectly exemplifies the mastermind principle in action. Edison generously contributed his incomparable experience in electrical engineering, his deep knowledge about mass production systems, his understanding of industrial patents, and his invaluable network of contacts in the international scientific community. Ford strategically contributed his fanatic obsession with operational efficiency, his instinctive understanding of the mass market, his unshakable determination in the face of obstacles, and his clear vision of practical applications for complex technologies. But the exchange was infinitely deeper than a simple superficial barter of complementary technical skills. Edison publicly validated Ford's revolutionary ideas precisely when the entire established automotive establishment considered them dangerous follies of an ignorant peasant. Ford inspired Edison to think beyond academic laboratories toward massive practical applications that could directly benefit millions of working families instead of only intellectual elites. Hill meticulously documented that Ford applied the mastermind principle not only with prominent figures like Edison, but systematically at all hierarchical levels of his growing organization. He created specialized teams of mechanical engineers, industrial designers, production experts, sales specialists, accountants, and lawyers who worked in perfect synchrony toward clearly defined common objectives. The key to Ford's extraordinary success in building masterminds lay in something that Hill consistently observed in all great historical leaders: the supernatural ability to make other people feel like genuine co-owners of the vision, not simply employees hired to execute orders. Ford's team members did not work for Henry Ford following instructions. They worked with Henry Ford building a future that everyone had helped imagine and design collaboratively. This subtle but psychologically powerful difference transformed obligatory individual effort into voluntary collective synergy. Hill noted that genuinely successful people understand a fundamental truth about large-scale human achievement. No individual mind, however naturally brilliant, possesses all the specialized knowledge, technical skills, professional connections, and perspectives necessary to materialize truly great visions. Chronic failures desperately try to do everything alone, erroneously convinced that asking for help is a sign of weakness or incompetence. Systematic winners deliberately build teams of specialized minds that function like a collective supermind capable of achievements impossible for isolated individuals. A single mind, however naturally powerful, cannot move mountains or build lasting empires. But several specialized minds working in perfect harmony toward a common purpose can literally change the world, because true transformative force does not lie in individual genius, but in the orchestrated symphony of complementary talents united by a shared vision. Chapter 4. Perseverance against criticism. The Chicago Tribune, one of America's most influential newspapers, published a devastating first-page article that ruthlessly described Henry Ford as a dangerous, ignorant anarchist and characterized his revolutionary ideas about mass automobile production as the delirious fantasies of a man without formal education who seriously threatens America's economic stability and established social order. The newspaper did not stop there in its public discrediting campaign. It convened a panel of recognized experts from the industry who unanimously declared that Ford's grandiose plans were technically impossible according to engineering laws and commercially suicidal according to basic economic principles. The night Ford slowly read those devastating words, he found himself alone in his personal study, silently surrounded by detailed technical plans, complex mathematical calculations, and metallic prototypes that represented years of obsessive work. Fierce criticism was not new to him. For years he had heard variations of the same destructive theme. He was too ambitious for a peasant, too unrealistic for the business world, too revolutionary for a society that had functioned perfectly with horses and carriages for centuries. But that night, something fundamental changed in Ford's mental perspective. Instead of allowing destructive criticism to discourage or distract him from his objectives, he strategically used it as psychological fuel to intensify his determination. Napoleon Hill would later identify this reaction as one of the most distinctive characteristics of all the great winners of history: the mental capacity to transform external opposition into additional internal motivation. Hill documented that Ford had developed what he scientifically called unshakable faith in his vision. But this faith was not blind, naive, or based on superficial optimism. It was a scientific confidence founded on rigorous analysis, constant experimentation, and a deep understanding of real human needs that his product could massively satisfy. Ford had meticulously calculated production costs using precise accounting methods. He had tested his designs over and over again until perfecting them through real tests. He had studied the potential market with the precision of a mathematician and the dedication of a scientist. His faith was backed by solid and verifiable facts, not by vague hopes or romantic illusions. Hill observed that genuinely successful people develop an absolutely peculiar mentality toward criticism that dramatically differentiates them from the average population. Most people allow negative opinions to gradually corrode their confidence and distract them from their original objectives, like acid that dissolves metal. But great winners have learned to use criticism as a psychological compass that indicates they are advancing in the correct direction toward unexplored territory. They intuitively understand that truly revolutionary ideas always generate initial resistance from the establishment because they threaten the status quo that benefits those who already have established power. Think of it this revealing way. When you drive at night on a completely unknown road toward a destination you have never visited, your headlights illuminate only a few meters ahead. You cannot see the final destination from the starting point, but you can see enough to take the next step with confidence. And then the next, and then the next. This is how Ford advanced during the most difficult and challenging years of his business career. Ford's previous commercial failures had not been purposeless accidents or punishments from fate. Each failed company had taught him valuable lessons about product design, efficient production, effective marketing, team leadership, and financial management. Hill noted that Ford did not see these failures as permanent defeats that defined his destiny, but as extremely expensive practical education paid with direct experience instead of money. Each public criticism became an opportunity for Ford to refine his arguments, strengthen his evidence, and better develop his ability to communicate his vision to skeptical people. Instead of avoiding confrontation, he sought it as exercise to develop stronger mental muscles. When the Ford Motor Company finally launched the Model T to the market in 1908, the same authoritative voices that had publicly ridiculed Ford for years were completely silent in the face of the vehicle's overwhelming commercial success. In its first year, the company sold more than 10,000 automobiles. By 1915, production had reached the astonishing figure of 500,000 vehicles annually. But Ford's true historical triumph was not measured solely in sales numbers or financial profits. It was measured in the massive social transformation that his automobiles generated throughout America. Families who had never traveled beyond their native towns now explored the entire continent with freedom. Rural workers could access jobs in distant cities without permanently relocating. Young people could seek higher education and commercial opportunities without being eternally limited by the geography of their birth. Hill documented that Ford had developed an absolutely unique perspective on success and failure that radically differentiated him from the average mentality. For Ford, the only real and unforgivable failure was to prematurely abandon the vision before completely materializing it. Everything else was simply necessary adjustments, valuable learning, and useful refinements on the inevitable path to the predetermined destination. This revolutionary mentality allowed Ford to maintain his course during the darkest periods when criticism was fiercest, resources scarcest, and success seemed most distant, while other businessmen became discouraged and changed direction at the first signs of resistance. Ford interpreted opposition as confirmation that he was advancing toward truly revolutionary territory. Ford's unshakable faith in his vision proved to be more powerful than all criticism, doubts, obstacles, and limitations combined, because he had learned the fundamental lesson that the loudest voices do not always belong to the wisest minds, and that history is inevitably written by those who persevere with determination when everyone else gives up for comfort. Chapter 5. The Secret Revealed by Hill. In his silent New York office, surrounded by towers of specialized books and meticulously organized files, Napoleon Hill reviewed for the 20th consecutive time his exhaustive notes on Henry Ford. Pages and pages of transcribed interviews, detailed observations, analyses of critical business decisions, and behavior patterns spread across his massive desk like pieces of a giant puzzle that was finally beginning to reveal itself with crystalline clarity. After more than 2 obsessive decades meticulously studying the most successful men in America, from steel magnates to genius inventors, from powerful bankers to visionary entrepreneurs, Hill had finally identified what he had sought since the beginning of his monumental research: a specific and reproducible formula that any person could systematically apply to transform their circumstances, regardless of their humble origin, limited education, or initial economic resources. Henry Ford's secret, according to Hill, was not an esoteric mystery reserved for initiates, nor an innate talent granted by the gods. It was the systematic and disciplined application of universal psychological principles that Ford had discovered intuitively, but that Hill could explain scientifically and teach methodically. The formula was elegantly simple in its structure: definite purpose, plus unshakable faith, inevitable success. But Hill knew that the apparent simplicity of the formula could be profoundly deceptive. Like an ignition key that seems like a small and insignificant object, but that starts a 300-horsepower engine, each element of the formula contained exponential power when applied correctly with understanding and discipline. The definite purpose, Hill meticulously explained, must be so clear and specific that you can describe exactly what you want to achieve, when you want to achieve it, what you are willing to give in exchange, and what will be your detailed action plan step by step. Ford had not vaguely said, "I want to be successful in automobiles," or "I desire to help people." His purpose was precise like a Swiss watch: to manufacture an automobile so economical that every American family could own one, thus transforming human mobility forever. Unshakable faith, Hill continued, is not blind optimism or superficial positive thinking. It is a deep and scientific confidence based on specialized knowledge, exhaustive preparation, and the understanding that universal laws of success work predictably when applied consistently with discipline. Ford had developed unshakable faith because he had meticulously studied his industry for years, had tested his ideas through rigorous experimentation, had surrounded his vision with detailed plans and competent teams, and had backed every aspect of his project with solid research. His faith was founded on verifiable facts and exhaustive preparation, not on vague hopes. But Hill discovered something even deeper in Ford's case that elevated his success from notable to legendary. The true genius did not reside solely in applying the formula once to achieve a specific objective, but in converting it into a life system that was automatically applied to new challenges and emerging opportunities. Every time Ford faced a new obstacle, he instinctively applied the formula. He specifically defined what he wanted to achieve to overcome the obstacle, developed unshakable faith in his capacity to find a creative solution and stayed disciplinedly focused until materializing the desired result. Hill documented that Ford applied this formula not only to automobile production, but systematically to the revolutionary policy of paying $5 per day to his workers when the industrial standard was $2.50, to creating the assembly line that transformed global manufacturing, to developing new models that satisfied specific market needs, and to the international expansion of his company to more than 30 countries. The genius of the formula, according to Hill, lies in its absolute universality. It doesn't matter if you want to build an industrial empire, write a bestseller novel, lose 30 kilos, learn a foreign language, improve your family relationships, or develop a new professional skill. The same principles that Ford applied to revolutionize global transportation can be successfully applied to any legitimate human objective. Hill had discovered that success is not a matter of blind luck, privileged connections, expensive formal education, or inherited fortunate circumstances. It is a matter of systematically and disciplinedly applying psychological principles that have worked for all the great winners of history, from the pharaohs of Egypt to Silicon Valley magnates. More importantly, Hill demonstrated that these principles are completely democratic. They do not discriminate by age, gender, race, religion, nationality, or social class. They work with the same precision for an immigrant without connections as for a millionaire heir, for a single mother as for a corporate executive, for a 20-year-old as for a 60-year-old entrepreneur. Hill taught that any person, regardless of their current situation, can apply Henry Ford's secret because the principles of success are as universal as the laws of gravity. They work for everyone, all the time, when applied correctly with systematic understanding and discipline. Chapter 6. The Universal Application of the Secret. What Hill discovered by studying not only Ford, but the 500 most successful men of his era, was something that would forever revolutionize our understanding of human potential. The secret works in any field of human activity, for any type of legitimate objective without exception. Andrew Carnegie had applied the same principles to build his steel empire. Thomas Edison had used them to create more than 1,000 revolutionary inventions. John D. Rockefeller had employed them to dominate the oil industry. Theodore Roosevelt had implemented them to reach the presidency. Alexander Graham Bell had used them to invent the telephone. Each of these titans had developed a crystalline, definite purpose in their specific field. Each had maintained unshakable faith through years of obstacles. Each had applied practical imagination to find innovative solutions. Each had built mastermind alliances with specialized people. Each had persevered against criticism and opposition. But Hill also studied common people who had applied the same principles to more modest objectives with equally impressive results. An Italian immigrant who had built a restaurant chain from scratch, a widow who had created a sewing business that employed 50 women, an ex-soldier who had developed an agricultural technique that tripled harvests. The key, according to Hill, was not in the grandness of the objective, but in the systematic application of the principles. A definite purpose works equally for earning $1 million as for losing 20 kilos, as long as it is applied with the same discipline and precision. Hill identified that most people fail not because the principles don't work, but because they don't apply them correctly. They confuse vague desires with definite purposes. They confuse superficial optimism with unshakable faith. They confuse frantic activity with focused action. Ford's secret was not that he was special, but that he applied special principles in a common and consistent way until they became part of his automatic nature. Conclusion. As the sun set over Detroit in 1927, Henry Ford, now 64 years old, walked slowly through the world's largest production plant. At his feet extended a sea of coordinated activity, thousands of workers moving in perfect synchrony, assembly lines functioning with chronometered precision, new automobiles leaving the factory every 10 seconds like heartbeats of a giant industrial heart. He observed with silent and deep satisfaction the assembly lines that had already produced more than 15 million Model T vehicles, exactly fulfilling the audacious vision he had imagined decades ago in his humble workshop with packed earth floor, when he was just an unknown mechanic with impossible dreams. But for Ford, the impressive numbers were completely secondary to the transformative human impact. He knew with certainty that each automobile that left his factories represented new opportunities for a working family, new possibilities for young entrepreneurs, new connections between communities that were previously completely isolated by the tyranny of geographical distance. Napoleon Hill, observing Ford's monumental legacy from the unique perspective of a scientific researcher of the human mind, had identified something extraordinary and hopeful. Ford had not been special for possessing unique talents or inherited advantages, but for his systematic application of universal principles consistently until they became an automatic part of his mental nature. Ford's fundamental principles of success, definite purpose, practical imagination, mastermind alliances, and unshakable perseverance, are not mystical gifts reserved exclusively for geniuses or people privileged by destiny. They are specific mental skills that can be systematically developed through conscious practice and disciplined application by any person willing to pay the price of personal growth. Your current situation, regardless of how limited, challenging, or hopeless it may seem at this moment, is simply the starting point of your personal story, not the inevitable conclusion predetermined by circumstances. Ford began as a farmer without formal education or influential connections. Hill began as an unknown journalist from a small town in West Virginia. Their initial circumstances did not predetermine their final destinies. The definite purpose that you consciously transform into daily productive obsession automatically becomes a supernatural magnetic force that mysteriously attracts opportunities, resources, specialized people, and favorable circumstances perfectly aligned with your vision. But it must be specific down to the last detail. It must have a non-negotiable deadline, and it must be unshakably backed by a detailed step-by-step action plan. The practical imagination that you creatively apply to daily problems gradually converts you into an invaluable problem solver for the modern world. You don't need to invent something completely new from scratch. You need to improve, simplify, accelerate, or make more accessible something that already exists, but that can be perfected to better serve humanity. The mastermind alliances that you strategically build with people who genuinely share your vision multiply exponentially your individual capacity for achievement to levels that seem supernatural. No individual mind, however naturally brilliant, possesses all the specialized knowledge, technical skills, professional connections, and perspectives necessary to materialize truly transformative visions. The unshakable perseverance that you develop through scientific faith in your vision allows you to systematically transform obstacles into solid stepping stones toward success. Destructive criticism becomes confirmation that you are advancing in the correct direction toward revolutionary territory. Temporary failures become invaluable practical education. Apparent delays become golden opportunities to perfect your strategy. These principles are not abstract theory created in universities. They are mental laws as reliable and predictable as the physical laws that govern the universe. They work automatically for everyone who applies them consistently, without exception, regardless of their age, gender, education, nationality, or current circumstances. At this crucial moment, you have a transcendental decision to make. You can continue passively allowing external circumstances to dictate your future, remaining a victim of forces that seem to be outside your control. Or you can take conscious and active control of your destiny by systematically applying the same immutable principles that Ford used to transform not only his own life, but the lives of millions of people throughout the civilized world. The time you have available is exactly the same that Ford and Hill had: 24 hours per day, 7 days per week, 52 weeks per year. The fundamental difference between extraordinary success and mediocre failure does not lie in the quantity of available time, but in how you consciously use that precious time and what specific mental principles you disciplinedly apply during those hours that will never return. The formal education you may or may not have received is completely irrelevant. Ford abandoned school at 16. The social connections you may or may not have are completely secondary. Ford was an unknown peasant. The financial resources you may or may not possess are completely optional. Ford began without capital. The only thing that really matters is your willingness to apply these principles with the same fanatic discipline that Ford applied for decades, regardless of opposition, regardless of obstacles, regardless of how long it takes to completely materialize your vision. Henry Ford's secret, according to Napoleon Hill, is not a distant mystery reserved for extraordinary people with supernatural talents. It is a universal master key that you too can use to open your own path to prosperity, because the immutable principles of success are democratically available to all who have the courage, discipline, and perseverance to apply them consistently until they become automatic habits. If this transformative message has resonated deeply in your mind and heart, if you have felt that unmistakable spark of recognition that tells you, "This is exactly what my soul needed to hear at this moment in my life," then the decisive moment has arrived to take immediate and decisive action. Knowledge without practical application is simply intellectual entertainment that does not transform lives. But knowledge applied systematically becomes transformative power that can completely and forever change the course of your personal and professional destiny. Subscribe to the channel right now and activate the notification bell to immediately receive more revolutionary secrets from the great winners of all history. Each video is meticulously designed to give you practical, proven and verified tools that you can immediately implement in your personal and professional life to create measurable results. Share this transformative video with someone you know desperately needs to hear this message. Perhaps a close friend who has been struggling to find clear direction in their life, a beloved family member who has great dreams but doesn't know how to systematically materialize them, or a talented colleague who possesses natural abilities but lacks effective strategy to apply them. Leave a comment below telling us what your definite purpose is and how you plan to apply Ford's secret in your specific situation. The community of people who follow this channel is committed to mutual growth and shared success. Your story can inspire others, and the stories of others can inspire you. Because just as Henry Ford transformed the entire world with a crystalline, definite purpose and unshakable faith backed by disciplined action, you too have exactly the same power sleeping within you to transform your own life and the lives of all the people around you, starting from this very instant. History is patiently waiting for your unique and irreplaceable chapter. Future generations are waiting for your special contribution to human progress. Your family is waiting for you to become the best version of yourself. What are you going to write on the blank pages that destiny has placed in your hands? What legacy are you going to leave? What transformation is going to begin today? The secret is revealed. The principles are explained. The tools are available. Now everything depends on you.